and welcome back to Random Librarian. It is review time, and today I want to talk about A Tale for the Time Being by Ruth Ozeki. This was a 2013 Man Booker Prize finalist, and let's just get right into it. It starts at the top of the back blurb with a part from the book itself, so it's our introduction to the character now. So she is writing in a journal, and kind of the reader insert character Ruth is reading this, and it says, "Hi, my name is Now, and I am a time being. Do you know what a time being is? Well, if you give me a moment, I will tell you." And then the actual blurb is, "On a remote island in the Pacific Northwest, a Hello Kitty lunchbox washes up on the beach. Tucked inside is the diary of a 16-year-old Japanese girl named Nao Yasutani. Ruth, a writer who finds the lunchbox, suspects that it is debris from Japan's 2011 tsunami. Once she begins to read the diary, Ruth quickly finds herself drawn into the mystery of Nao's fate. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, Nao, uprooted from her home in the US, bullied at school, and watching her parents spiral deeper into disaster, has decided to end her own life. But first, she wants to recount the story of her great-grandmother, the 104-year-old Zen Buddhist nun, in the pages of her secret diary." Full of Ruth Ozeki's signature humor and insight, A Tale for the Time Being deftly blurs the line between fact and fiction. So, of course, the first way that it blurs fact and fiction is that the author's name is Ruth and the main character's name is Ruth as well. The story is told in 4 parts with an appendice, and the appendices explain everything from like the Zen way to quantum mechanics to Schrodinger's cat. Like, it's all over the place. It's just kind of everything that gets talked about in the book or between characters or like in someone's thoughts that Ruth, the author, thinks needs further explanation. Altogether, there are 422 pages, though only 403 of those are actually telling the story. The chapter numbering is actually a bit hard to gauge because the book itself switches back and forth between the 2 voices of the main characters. So like Now will have a section and then Ruth will have a section, and it goes back and forth. And each of those sections has numbered chapters, and then within those numbered chapters there are also unnumbered sections. And the chaptering starts over each time the characters swap. So like Now will have a chapter and it'll start like 1 and then subsection and then 2 and then maybe a subsection and then 3, and then it goes to Ruth's voice and it starts over with 1 again. So it's kind of hard to say like exactly how many chapters are within each section and then within the book itself. I don't want to do that much math. This book has 4 stars on Goodreads, and I am going to read you guys 2 of the 5-star reviews that I found that I thought actually handled the description of the book really, really well, possibly even better than the back of the book itself. So this next one that I'm going to read it was part of an article on the Man Booker Prize 2013 shortlist for Bookaholic, and it's written by Rebecca, and she has shelved this as one of her absolute faves. And she starts off saying, "If I'd had my way, the 2013 Man Booker Prize would have gone to this novel. A Tale for the Time Being is a rich reflection on what it means to be human in an era of short attention spans, the dearth of meaning, and imminent environmental threat. On present-day Vancouver Island, Ruth, a Japanese-American novelist who is attempting to write a memoir of her mother's slow demise from Alzheimer's, but has a bad case of writer's block, stumbles across a Hello Kitty lunchbox washed up on the beach. Inside, she finds the cache of old letters and a teenage girl's diary, disguised as a copy of Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu. The diary belonged to 16-year-old Nao, pronounced Now. Is it all starting to fit together? Yasutani, who cheerfully and informally confides in her imagined reader about her life. The past few years in Tokyo have not been easy for her. She's been the victim of extreme bullying at the hands of her classmates, and suicide seems to run in the family. But she has a guardian angel in the form of her great-grandmother, Buddhist nun Jiko, who is approaching death at age 104, but still represents the voice of wisdom and a timeless perspective. In a modified epistolary format that includes diaries, letters, emails, and an abstract of a disappearing Journal article, Ozeki builds her dental academic mystery. Where did the lunchbox come from? How did it wash up in Canada? Are Now and the other diary subjects still alive and well, or did they die in the 2011 Japanese tsunami? Alternating chapters contrast Now's diary entries with Ruth's reactions and commentary a decade later. Yet, in a delirious outbreak of magic realism, it seems Ruth may actually have some power to change Now's fate. This is a superbly intelligent novel with concerns ranging from ocean currents and pollution to the wacky quantum physics theory of multiple worlds. Ultimately, is about being happy in the here and now, not looking to the past or the future for contentment or hope, and not indulging in regret or wishes. And then Teresa wrote, "What a ride. This novel sucked me in and then spit me out, leaving me gasping as it did. I can't say this book is perfect. It's probably a bit flawed, as many novels are, but with the totality of it meaning so much more than any flaws might take away. None of these flaws come from the writing itself, though, and if you feel some things here and there are a bit slow, please be patient. Zen Buddhism is a big theme after all. It picks up quickly and flows again almost immediately. There are many postmodern metafictional elements to the telling of this story, ones we've seen before, footnotes, mostly to explain Japanese words, appendices, read them as they're mentioned, they elucidate and don't bore. A main character who's a novelist, and who I'm sure is also not the novelist, but they are so well done and seem so accessible and integral to the tale that none jar or feel overfamiliar. The story is told with some humor in the beginning, enough to lull you, with the voice of the young girl Now in the diary, to almost forgetting a couple of telltale bits that surely don't mean what probably do mean. She's too young, you tell yourself. That would be too sad, too horrible. And then when you are hit with what she's endured and is enduring when she reaches her Now, it's that much more heartbreaking and even harder to read. Adding to the growing darkness is the addition of Now's great-uncle Haruki's secret diary, which contains some of the most horrific things that are done in World War II. And so many themes, ones I love, ones that I saw in new ways, mostly to do with time and being and non-being, as you might guess from the title. But still, much more. Memory, dreams, the effects of violence, stories, reading and writing, who is actually calling into being, creating whom. The handling of these themes is masterful, a word I rarely use in reviews, but when I do, I must give the book 5 stars. So those reviews are really, really well written, and they do touch on some things that I wish had been more evident on the back of the actual novel itself. It really needs to come with trigger warnings. For me reading this as an American reader, I was kind of taken aback when September 11th popped up in the middle of my reading, especially because they go in depth talking about the people who were in the Twin Towers and ended up taking their own lives and jumping from the buildings after the planes had already hit. And suicide is a huge theme in the book. It's just that specific instance is so powerful in like collective American memory that it took me right back to like where I was when the Twin Towers fell, when the attacks happened, and I didn't even have like a personal connection to someone in New York at that time, so I can only imagine how taken off guard someone who actually lost a loved one would feel. The stories that they talk about in World War II as well, with her uncle's secret diary, are horrific. The bullying that she goes through is way worse than like the one line on the back of this novel could have ever prepared me for. It's just, there's some attempts at like sexual violence, the same way that Teresa says in her review. You kind of convince yourself that like, no, she's a kid, like that's what I think is going to happen, or like what feels like it's being foreshadowed. Like there's no way that that can be true, but there's a lot that happens that is very rough to read. But I don't want to say that as a way of saying like, don't read this, it was too much. It's handled in a great way, and it's written in a way that's really real, so that's why it's so impactful. I just think especially for like 9/11 and like how explicit things are with suicide in this book, that a little bit more warning would have been a good thing. So that's what this review is for. Here's your warning. So despite the lack of trigger warnings, I do really recommend this book. I think it is really, really well written. I'm gonna give a couple of thoughts. They might kind of bounce around a little bit. This is my first review, so I'm sure I'll get into like the habit of it and like the swing of things as I do more of them, but for now, that's just kind of what's happening. I like don't even have that many notes to do because the book really sucked me in, so I wasn't even thinking of like, oh, I should make note of that, I should come back to that later and like talk about it in a review and like quote it, so we'll see. But just like a first initial thoughts without referring to the text, I didn't really start off caring about Ruth's storyline all that much. It was really late in the game that I started like actually caring what happened in Canada, because at first her life seems really boring. Her marriage, it started out as like a conference hookup, and then like she specifically says that if it had been any other time, if they had met in any other time other than like the augment of the internet age, it would have ended then and that would have been fine. But because like they were able to communicate through email, their relationship continued, and then Ruth's mother was dying and she needed health care, and the husband is from Canada, so they got married and they moved to this like really remote island and like took care of her mother whose memory was failing due to Alzheimer's. I don't know, it feels like two people, yeah, like there are moments when they seem like they have affection for each other, but then there's also moments when it seems like they really resent each other. It's a weird match. He's also presented as like this great intellectual, and she's kind of scatterbrained, but she's scatterbrained in a way that like it doesn't, I don't think any of it's like a big deal, but like she's freaking out over it because her mother obviously just like had Alzheimer's and like she's concerned about her own memory, but like she'll forget details of the story as it's going along, but they're details that like we forget too. So the husband kind of becomes this way of being like, remember that thing I wrote about like 200 pages ago? And then Ruth freaks out because she's like, I don't remember that thing, and like it was in my head. And I'm like, I was in your head too and I don't remember it. Like neither of us is going crazy. He's just got a weird memory and like he's a plot device. Like that's what's happening here. The other thing about it is that like Ruth claims to be a like city person. She moved from New York City, like the island of Manhattan, to this island that I think like is called something about like the Island of the Dead or like some kind of creepy name like that in Canada. She loves and hates where they live and like does want to leave and also doesn't, but like isn't really willing to like make action on anything. She is writing a memoir, spends all of her time researching Now's story instead of actually like writing or reading what she's previously written. I think there's several reasons that I liked Now's story so much more. Firstly, like just the style of writing. Now is writing in first person and it feels very like immediate what's happening to her. There's a lot going on in her story as well, and because Ruth cares so much more about Now's story than she does about her own, like that's how it feels for the reader too. They're almost pen pals, but only one of them knows both sides of the story. I mean, Now's story also does have its issues, especially around the different stories of suicide that happen throughout the entire book. Like this is big spoilers, so like her dad tries to commit suicide multiple times, and his kind of willingness to leave the planet coupled with what Now is going through herself, which is horrific, makes her want to commit suicide. And then we're reading her uncle Haruki's journal, and he was a kamikaze pilot. He was supposed to commit suicide for his country, but the training that they put them through and the horrors that his fellow soldiers did to occupied China, I want to say, mean that he actually ends up committing suicide just into the ocean. Sorry for the changing lighting. My memory card was awful. So Now's story isn't perfect either. She is wrestling with a lot of things, and her dad is wrestling with a lot of things too, and like they're not communicating at all. So he starts trying to commit suicide, and Now just knows that like her dad doesn't have a job and like can't leave the apartment, and it's like kind of embarrassing. And there's one point that literally just like, oh my God, was a knife to the heart for me, in that he gets back from a suicide attempt. So she tells her dad if he's gonna kill himself to actually succeed. Yeah. So she takes like kind of a weird, she takes a sense of comfort from her uncle's letters, or his journal, but she also doesn't get the full picture, because he has a journal that like, and his letters that get sent through his superiors, and then he has a secret journal the same way that Now has a secret journal that he writes in French, that Ruth somehow gets a hold of, but like Now has never seen. And that's when the book gets like kind of, it just starts sliding into like further and further from like reality, because we're reading the translated version of what her uncle has written. She knows like some of what he's been through, that like training was really hard and he was almost bullied, but like to the next level because it's adults and they have military training. She has his official letters and knows kind of some of what he went through, so she takes comfort in that because she's going through the same type of thing at school. And she starts having like dreams while she's reading this journal, because like that she's there, but you think it's just because she's an author and like she writes fiction, so she's starting to like live the experience. But then as it gets further into the book, it's almost like she can impact Now's story. And there's one part she goes and finds Now's dad, who is about to do like his final attempt for suicide, because he found a group online where he had like friends, or like made friends to commit suicide together. And this is also all happening at like a pressure point where Now gets a text from her grandmother's kind of like co-nun. There's two nuns who live and work and pray out of this temple, and she gets a text from this other nun saying, you have to come now, like your grandmother is not well, like we think this is the end. And she Now's gone and visited before, like for a summer her dad took her, so she rushes home to tell her dad that they need to get on a train, that they need to catch the bus, that they need to get to the temple. And she like looks into his bag and there's charcoal briquettes, which is apparently a way that people commit suicide in Japan. So she sees that, and then she like closes the bag, and he comes out and they have like, he's trying to have like a normal conversation with her, and she's like, you're checked out and I needed you. And she's kind of like, she's obviously upset for like so many different reasons. And as he's leaving, he uses the Japanese form of goodbye that says, I'm leaving and I'm coming back. And she just won't respond to him, so he leaves, and under her breath she says, liar. And then she gets the train, she gets to like the bus stop, and as she's writing in it, she reaches her like Now. So this entire time she's been like telling the past and like trying to catch up to her present, and in that moment she catches her present, and Ruth goes to flip the page and there are no more words. And before that, like she'd flipped through like the entire thing and there were words on all of the pages. So she starts freaking out because the words have all gone, like they've disappeared. So Now is in danger, even though Now's Now is like 10 years before the Now of the book. So she then has this like really trippy like dream sequence that involves a bird that like showed up outside of their house, and like also their cat goes missing. And there's so much that happens within that one section, and it's so trippy at the same time that you need to read it to get it. And like I read it and now I don't get it again. Like I understood it while it was happening, but now I'm like, wait, what? During that whole sequence, Ruth finds Now's dad and like tells him, your daughter is about to commit suicide, also you should go to the temple because like your grandmother's dying. And then she somehow has the uncle's private French diary with her in the dream, and like puts it in a box in the temple, like the box that was supposed to hold his his remains. She like puts it in that, and then later now finds it, even though she'd looked in that box before and it hadn't been there. So she's like affecting the past, but like where was the book before that? It never gets explained. I love a good footnote, and I love exchanging authorial voices, so these two aspects of this book kind of working together made me really happy. The style of writing it's amazing. Like, I can totally see why this was up for the Man Booker Prize. All I can say really at the end of it is it's complex, it is really well written, the story is so interesting. Though I didn't really care at first what was happening to Ruth, the last bit of the story really like gets its hooks into you, and you're like, okay, I care. I need to know what happens to both of them and how they're connected and how it's gonna end. I think the bottom line for me and what I want to make evident about this book is that it is a really satisfying read. It makes you work for the storyline. It makes you work to understand both the cultural implications of the different storylines and the like beyond this world version of what's happening. But it's worth it in the end. It is just such a good book, and it's keeping me thinking about it even for this like week after I finished it. I'm trying to read other things, but they're not, you'll see in my next review why it's not holding my attention so much. But this, I think, would still be in my mind even if the next book that I was reading was a new favorite. It's just very impactful, and talking about it makes me want to dive back in and reread and re-understand and hopefully get to a point where I can better explain all of the things that I really loved about this book. So I hope that makes a bit more sense than the rambling I've been doing thus far. Those are all of the thoughts that are coming to me right now on A Tale for the Time Being. I tried to kind of write down my thoughts, that's why I'm looking down a couple of times during this video, but honestly it's just kind of hard to articulate all of them all at the same time because the chronology of the book is so all over the place that it just gets... I'm confusing myself, I think. So if you liked this review, or if you hope that maybe in the future you will like them once I get better at doing these types of reviews, please hit the subscribe button down below and give this video a like. I will be back pretty soon with another book review. More long-form reviews are going to be here on YouTube, but shorter-term reviews are going to be on Instagram at the account Random Librarians. So if you'd like to read more concise thoughts on the books that are holding my attention right now, that is the best place to go. I will see you guys soon, and until then, happy reading!